Hello everybody. Looks like we are all set up and getting started here. If you are just tuning in, thanks for joining. I am going to be talking about a few different things today, but I think I want to focus on some of the interoperability between PowerPoint and Excel and how we can kind of leverage that to apply some of our skills we already have in PowerPoint to our dashboards, reports, or whatever else that we make in Excel. I just need to get everything set up here. If you are already tuning in, let me know in the chat if everything looks like it's working okay, audio's okay. Looks like we have what we need here. Give me just a second as I get everything set up. Okay, looks good. Alrighty. Well, let's hop right into it. So, anybody who's tuned into my stuff before has seen me talk endlessly about the ways in which you can use Excel a little bit more like PowerPoint, right? It's one of my favorite topics. Excel has a powerful set of visual design features built right in, and these design features work exactly the same way they do in PowerPoint. They have the same interfaces they have in PowerPoint. It's really a perfect carryover in terms of skills you already have in one platform being brought over to another. So we can drop in shapes, we can drop in images, we can layer things, and this all essentially enables you to do all the same visual design here that you would anywhere else. So if we, let me just break this down so everyone can see it. If we kind of look at this dashboard example, our furthest layer back is our cell grid layout, right? Rows, columns, where our data goes. And then on top of that, we can layer on shapes, we can layer in images, visual designs, put those all on top. On top of all of that, we can add charts, visualizations, etc. And on top of all of that, we can put even more, right? So we can just keep stacking things together. And that's just in the same way in PowerPoint. You create complex designs in PowerPoint by stacking things together, right? Same concept applies here. And I think when we kind of open up our mind to thinking about Excel in this way, it lets us start to really push the boundaries of what's possible there. It lets us do a lot more than we thought we might be able to do. So I think the building block here is understanding that we have to get our data out of the cells, the cell grid layout, that's the furthest layer back, and into text boxes and visualizations that we float on top of everything else. And I think just for some people that can be a little confusing the first time they try it. So you're used to Excel being this, right? Rows, columns of data, everything's set up in such a way that it's very structured and organized and very rectangular, as I'd like to describe it. So this is great, and it works. I say this all the time, works really well for processing your data. It just doesn't work very well for displaying it. So essentially what we're going to do is use a few techniques. The first one is we're kind of trying to give up on this idea that you always have to show a giant table of data. Giant tables of data may be appropriate in some cases, but in most cases they aren't what you really want. Typically what you're going to want is a summary metric or a visualization of that data. So that might take a little bit of thinking, but you have to make the decision about what KPI you want to bring to the front, how to summarize it, and then once you have that, it's very easy to pull that into a text box. Now this process is not that hard. Under the Insert tab, we've got a text box option. Drop a text box in there, and all you do, go to your formula bar, hit equals, click on whatever cell you want, hit enter. Now this text box is tied to this cell, and anytime this cell changes, this text box updates, and we can now move this text around our page, format it, put it wherever we want. We have the full flexibility to use this to build more complex designs. Now if we cut that and paste it, we can put it on another page where we start to build out, say, a dashboard. So that's the first basic idea. The other one is to use visualizations. Visualizations are another great way of summarizing your data or capturing your data in a way that isn't stuck in that cell grid layout. Let me find a better example to show you. We'll use this one. So the idea of these visualizations, and this is, again, I'm not going to give a full course on data visualization here, but we're trying to capture the important metrics that matter to us and present them in a way where the visual actually amplifies or gives more insight than the metric itself. So when we look at something like this, yes, I could put a giant table of all sales month by month over time. That would be fine. But it is not as useful as actually having a visualization, a line chart showing how those sales have fluctuated. That kind of basic concept is applied in all types of visualizations. How you choose visualizations, again, it's a little tricky, takes a little practice, and what I tell people is to just really think about what you're trying to communicate with the visual, right? Here I've got two bar charts stacked on top of each other to kind of show proportionality between profit and sales. This communicates that proportionality more effectively than me just putting one metric and another metric and saying interpret it yourself, right? We're always thinking about visualizations as answering a question or communicating an idea more effectively. And with a little bit of practice, I think if people get in there, you go to the Insert tab, get whatever data you have, and just start playing with these different visuals, you'll figure it out pretty quickly. And Excel does a great job of sort of making it easy for you to use these charts. Let's go to some data here. If you just have a table somewhere, you highlight it, it's going to give you a bunch of recommended chart options. And you can just start messing around with it. Drop in some line charts, drop in some bar charts, drop in any other chart type. And think about what it's showing you as you get the results. If I present something as a donut chart, in this case, that donut chart gives a very different insight than a bar chart, right? It presents the data in a fairly different way. I'm going to pause here just for a sec. If you are tuning in on YouTube or LinkedIn, drop a comment because I'm not sure if everything's connected. I'm using Restream for this, I believe, which is sort of letting me stream in two places at once. I'm going to go over and see if this is working. Give me a second. Thanks for holding in there, everybody. Okay, yeah, looks like we got some folks in here. Okay, so it looks like it's working. If you have questions or comments, toss them in the chat. I will pause along the way and chat with people, answer questions. Happy to do that as we go. All right. Oh, and I, of course, got Mo here, who is seemingly very happy to be on camera today. He's being very cooperative. Okay, so we kind of have that basic principle of, all right, we can take data out of cells, out of a table or a cell grid layout, and we can put that data into text boxes, and we can put it into visualizations, and that is going to kind of force us to think about how we want to summarize our data and how we're communicating with our data. It does that all in a much more effective, it forces us to do it in a more effective way than just presenting data as is in a big giant table. And this, excuse me, I'm gonna grab some water. This is where we get into the kind of visual design side of things, the sort of PowerPoint side of things. So when I start building these, I'm thinking about it as sort of a page layout, right? So when you see this page, you go, wow, that's like so fancy. What is this? This is just all rectangles stacked together. Our background's a rectangle. And then on top of that, I've done some little rectangles to block out subsections within the bigger rectangle. And within that, I've added other rectangles to block out other sections, etc. Now, I often actually start this on just literally pen and paper. So when I first do this, I actually will just grab a piece of paper and start sketching this out. And I'm asking myself a few things. The first is, obviously, what am I trying to communicate with my audience? What am I trying to say here? I like to use what I call like a narrative pyramid technique for this, which is if I try to sum up what I'm trying to communicate in one word, what would that word be? Let's say sales. Now, if I had to do it in a sentence, what would that sentence be? And it would be, how is my sales performance doing this month versus previous months? Maybe that's the full sentence. And then if I go a little farther, what am I trying to say? How is my sales performance doing? And let's say we do 2 sentences, 3 sentences. How's my sales performance doing over time compared to my profitability? And how does that play into the performance of each of my separate units of my business or whatever else, right? And we just keep going. You don't need to go forever, but you just get to the point where you feel like you've effectively thought through what you're trying to say to your audience. Now, this is going to do 2 things. One, it's going to help you figure out, okay, top of the pyramid, this is the focal point. The focal point is sales in this case, let's say. It's then going to help you think through, okay, if sales is the focal point, what is the contextual information I have to provide to make that number useful and make sense? That's going to be the kind of, as you move down the narrative pyramid, when you're using more sentences to describe it, you're going to use those as the guide. And as you keep going down the pyramid, that's going to help you kind of figure out how you're going to segment your data, what you're going to highlight, etc. So in this example, okay, we know we want sales to be the focal point, and we know that sales isn't really going to make sense if we don't present it alongside profit. We also maybe want to see this broken down by individual product category. Let's say we've got 3 main product categories here. And we know we need to show both of those over time, effectively month by month over time. And we need to get into the details of each of the product categories. Okay, great. Now we can kind of do that. We have a sense of what we need. So as we start doing that, if we're literally sketching this out on pen and paper, we might be starting to think about like, okay, well, focal point is sales, so I would need a big section for that. I want it to stand out, so I'm going to use a different color here for that one. I know I'm going to have my 3 product categories here, so I'm going to have 3 small sections for each product category, along with a section to the left with like a summary chart. I know up here I need lots of horizontal space because this one's going to show a time series, so I've given myself plenty of horizontal space for that. And I'm usually, again, starting this out literally on pen and paper, just kind of sketching it out. You're not always going to get this perfect the first time around. You kind of have to adjust it and change it as you go, but you just want to have that starting point, because starting with an organized page like this, you notice how everything's the same height, everything's got the same spacing, everything looks nice and clean and organized. That is like 80% of the work to making your dashboards look more professional and more kind of, just visually pleasing and engaging. Another thing you can think about here that's a different technique to the narrative pyramid technique I was talking about is also this idea of just anticipating your audience's questions. And what I mean by that is you should obviously know the people you're giving this report to and know the job they do and how they operate and all of that. Within that, you should then be able to say, hey, if I show this to them, what do I think the first thing they're going to ask is going to be? And this is like not just a narrative exercise, it's also like a human psychology exercise. The moment our brain shifts into the mode of showing something to somebody else and getting their feedback, it shifts our perspective, and we do a lot better job of figuring out where the flaws are or the holes are or where the issues are with our work. So that's what we're essentially talking about doing here, is saying, hey, okay, I'm going to show this to somebody. What's the first thing they're going to ask about? What's the first issue they're going to have? Whatever else. And as you start to do that, it's a really great way of highlighting what you need to show first. So if I think about this, if I just had this dashboard and I didn't have product categories yet, and I'm thinking, hey, I'm showing this to somebody who runs a bunch of different, multiple product categories throughout this business, and I have this first part that you see behind me right now, they're going to see this, and I know the first thing they're going to ask is, hey, this is great, but it doesn't really help me if I can't see it broken down by product category. And because I've anticipated that question, of course, I've included a whole section for product category information. That's a really oversimplified example, but that concept of like getting to know your audience, getting to know the questions that they're going to ask, and thinking about how to answer those questions within the dashboard before they ask them is going to go a really, really long way for helping you build better, stronger, more useful kind of reports that are going to get adopted and used by people. So it's just one of many little tricks I use for starting to think about like what do you even put on the page in the first place. You'll see in a lot of my dashboards that the visuals I use, and there are some issues with these behind me. Let me first clarify, this needs far more labels than it has, far more all sorts of things. It's a visual design example more than anything else. But I really believe in this idea that the visualizations that you choose don't necessarily, it's not necessarily that there's always a right answer to the right visual. Because if you did that, we would never see another pie chart or donut chart ever used again, because there's always a better chart than a donut and pie chart, technically speaking. But that's not always what it's about. Sometimes when we're presenting data, the focus is on drawing your attention to specific areas. The focus is on emphasizing something that's on the page or reiterating a metric that's there, but making sure people actually see it and take away a message from it. So I tell people, use a little bit more flexibility than you might be taught to use when it comes to choosing visualizations, because oftentimes that's more effective. And here's the example I'm going to use that people just go crazy over, not in a good way. The donut charts are a great example because everybody hates donut charts, it seems like, in the data community. But I don't want to get into that. That one's a little too contentious. But geocharts are a good example. So geocharts are not a super effective visualization type. And what I mean by that is they're very hard to interpret. It's very hard to have a takeaway here of how much higher is this value in Florida than this value over here in South Carolina. Like, you visually, we're not very good at interpreting that. So the chart doesn't really effectively communicate that data very well. But geocharts are just incredibly engaging. I've done a bunch of A/B testing on my dashboards before where I've had one version with a geochart, one version without a geochart. The versions with geocharts every single time get used more. And that just, it's not a rational thing. It's not like people are actually using those geocharts themselves. It's that geocharts capture our imagination. They're inspiring, they're cool, they evoke a feeling of like, ooh, look how data-driven I'm being, I think. I think they kind of play into that data-driven sort of fantasy people have. And so I will sometimes include geocharts, not because they're effectively communicating anything about these metrics and how much higher or lower they are. I'll include them because they get people engaged and focused. On top of that, I will also use them. I try to squeeze every ounce of usefulness out of them. And one thing they are also very effective at is just telling you what region you're looking at, right? Somebody looks at this, they instantly know that they're looking at the United States, and more than that, that they're looking at a particular region of the south of the United States, because nothing else has data in it. So they can be a very nice UI element for reminding people where they are and what data they're looking at for what geolocation. Again, they don't do a great job showing you how much higher or lower the metrics are in any of these locations, but they do tell you what location you're looking at pretty effectively, which can be great, especially in a dashboard like this where somebody can select a different region, and then this should refresh and then show you the new region that you're in. So they can work great for that. But anyway, that's just an example of, like, technically speaking, with a formal kind of education in doing data visualization, you would never use this because it's not effective. But the bottom line is that it is effective, just not in that way that you might expect. And that is kind of what I tell people is, like, I break the traditional rules of data viz all the time, constantly. Pretty much on every project in some way I break those rules of traditional data viz. But I do it in a way that's considerate. I think about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. It's not just out of nowhere for fun. It's to serve a purpose. But you just, the very, very rigid way that we're taught to think about data visualization and the way that we present data, I think can sometimes become unhelpful, depending on the situation. Whew. Okay, so I kind of gave the overall spiel. That's like the main highlight points that I give across all my videos. I think there's another point in all of this, and if you've watched this far, maybe it's too late to kind of present this to you, but anybody can do this stuff. This is not using custom coding, it's not using plugins, it's using standard Excel. You don't even have to have the latest version of Excel to do this stuff. The shape features, the text box features, the visual features, these are all in pretty much every version of Excel. So this is all stuff that, like, people mostly have access to. And the skills we're using, like I said, really leverage skills that you probably have already learned from something like PowerPoint, right? When we're building these up, we're inserting shapes, right? And then we're layering things on top of the shapes, like images or metrics, text, visualizations, etc. That kind of process is something people have typically done before in PowerPoint. They've just never thought about doing it in Excel. So, like, you probably have those foundational skills you need to get started. Of course, everybody's not a visual designer, and you don't have to be. You don't have to make it look like this, right? It's just all about starting to at least do the basics. Anybody can organize a page, right? Take the time to align all your shapes, make sure they're evenly distributed, etc. And for context, if you don't know how to do that, if you hold Shift and select two shapes, you can go to your Shape Format tab and use these alignment tools here. So you can align top, left, right, and you can also distribute horizontally evenly if you have more than two shapes selected. All of that's available here. And if you just take the time to do that, just get everything loosely aligned, making it look organized, that's going to go a long way. If then on top of that, you start, maybe taking the time to customize your charts a little bit, have a color scheme and a color palette that's consistent, doing that kind of stuff, that's going to go really far too. It's really going to make your work stand out. If you want to get even a little fancier than that, you want to start kind of having an overall kind of template type approach to this, where you're having really, really carefully designed charts and really, really carefully designed backgrounds, or you want to do something fancy like working some imagery into it. That's going to make your work stand out even more. You don't need to have all of the skills at once. Each one of those little foundational skills is going to take you farther and farther and make your work stand out more and more and more. And that really can add up. That can go really, really far. I also just want to pause here again. If you are watching this, if you're on LinkedIn or YouTube, I think that's the two places this is streaming. Let me know in the comments if things are working. I sometimes feel like I might just be talking into the abyss, or that like the mic might not be working or something, and I don't have a way of actually monitoring the stream here. So I will keep an eye out for comments, questions, etc. And if you do drop a comment or question, it is very helpful. Just lets me know that it's working, that the video is getting out there. And let me just jump right back into it. Oh, DJ, thank you for letting me know that it's all working, by the way. Very much appreciated. Okay. So we talked a little bit there about foundational skills that go into this, that it's not as complex as people might think, and that people probably have a lot of those foundational skills already. We've shown some examples. I wanted to talk a little bit about how we do the interoperability between Excel and PowerPoint. So let me just try an example here. Let's copy this chart, maybe one of these cards. Let's just see what happens here. So when I say interoperability between, oh, Tina, thank you for letting me know that the stream's working, by the way. What I mean by that is that the design features that are in Excel and PowerPoint sort of align for the most part. You don't have animations and that sort of thing, but most of the stuff's there. So let's drop this in. I'm not going to link these files, but just keep in mind, if you are on PC, you can actually link PowerPoint to Excel, so that when you update your Excel file, all of that flows through to PowerPoint. That's great if you're having to update a presentation all the time. Okay, so other than the size, because I haven't taken the time to align the sizing on this, we're able to drop our entire chart in. We're able to drop all of these visual elements in. So this is coming from Excel to PowerPoint. And, obviously we could update our background colors and everything. I'm not going to get too deep into that right now. But just for context, we can then also, if this is in PowerPoint, copy this. Oh, Sunny, thank you for letting me know everything's working, by the way. And go back over to PowerPoint. Go back over to Excel and drop this in from PowerPoint. So it goes both ways. So let's say you're somebody who's very comfortable with doing Excel, very comfortable with doing PowerPoint designs, right? Maybe you're really good at that. Well, then maybe what you do is you just start in PowerPoint and do your initial designs there, and then literally copy paste them over to Excel. There's no reason you can't do that, and it will totally work. Let me see if I have an example of... Sorry, I'm just going to open one of my old PowerPoints here. Let's see. Global Excel Summit. Oh, wait, no, that's just a template. Hold on. Thanks for bearing with me here for a second, folks. Is this it? I'm just trying to find one of my presentations I've done. Fortunately, all my file linking is messed up right now, so I'm not able to open one. But if you find a PowerPoint template you really like, what I tell people is that can be the base of the inspiration you use for your dashboards as well. So, gosh, I really wish I had something I could... Let's try this one. Nope. Okay, well, for now we're going to have to live without it. I can't give an example, unfortunately, but next stream I'll grab one. Essentially, you can find PowerPoint templates you really like, and you can use those and copy-paste elements over and bring it into Excel and capture all of that design in Excel. No problem. Obviously, you have to adjust your sizing and stuff a little bit, make sure you have the right background colors, but that there is an integration between the two that can be done that can make things a lot easier and maybe a little bit less intimidating if you're somebody who's feeling like, oh, I'm doubting my skills to do this in Excel. I I think part of where that doubt comes from is, again, because we are all so used to this sort of cell grid layout approach to Excel. And we're like, well, wait, how in the world would I turn this into this? And the basic idea is that it's not really that you're turning this into the right into this. You're not necessarily doing that. What you're doing is saying big tables of data maybe aren't the most effective way for me to communicate this. If I was making a PowerPoint about this, I would probably summarize my data down to a few core metrics, and I would probably wouldn't show an entire table of data. What would I show instead? Because what I'm really doing is I'm trying to communicate an idea through to an audience, right? And when you look at it that way, that's when it starts to become a little bit easier. Is it's like really what you're doing here, in a sense, you could think about each of these as like a little tiny PowerPoint slide. And you've kind of laid them all out, one next to another, to communicate an idea a little more effectively. I think that kind of mindset can help a little bit. So much of, I think, the block here is not people's inability, but instead just the way we think about what's possible in these tools. I get like a million questions on these streams about, well, why wouldn't you just use Power BI for this? Why wouldn't you just use Tableau for this? Why wouldn't you just use ClickSense or Looker or one of the other gajillion tools out there? And I say a couple of things. One is, of course, if you're connecting to structured data, right? If you're connecting to a database, if you're using an API, if you are using any kind of existing data connector, then of course it would probably make sense to use Power BI or Tableau or whatever else. But I've found overwhelmingly the majority of data work that's going on out there is not done that way. The majority of data work is being done in Excel with tiny little data sets that people are manually pulling in and updating because there's no data connector to use in the first place. And for that kind of stuff, it's all, for the most part, a lot easier to just start doing your visualizations and your reporting in Excel because you're in there already. You're not going to automate it because there isn't an automation option available to you. So you just kind of use what you've got and make the most out of it. And more importantly, I think, is that all of this stuff is just as easy to do in Excel as it is in any other tool, for the most part. You can customize your charts in essentially the same way you do in any other tool. You just click into each series, you can customize the color, you can do all that kind of stuff. Everything else kind of works the same way. The layout, like I said, we're kind of using this layout in a similar way to PowerPoint, right? This all is fairly straightforward in terms of, in comparison to other tools out there. Other tools do make it easier in some ways. There are little areas that they make it easier, but overall, Excel is not that much harder to do this with than anything else. I also like to mention, and this is just a real shout out to Excel and the team who builds Excel, which is that the level of chart customization in Excel is actually pretty exceptional when you compare it to other tools. There's a lot of tools out there. I've used a lot of BI tools out there. You can do customization faster, easier, and more of it, more customization in general in Excel than many of the other tools out there. I can do all sorts, like if I click into just this donut chart, right? I can click into every single series. I can customize it. I'm not just stuck using single colors. I could fill it with gradients. I could fill it with pictures and textures, patterns, all sorts of stuff, right? There's like a pretty tremendous amount of flexibility here. Oh, oops, excuse me. If you're doing charts, you have the ability to have markers and lines, and you can customize the markers and the lines. And it's not just that you can customize the markers and the lines, you can customize the markers and the lines and the outline around the markers and the lines and the fill for the markers and the lines, to the point with which I could have a marker where instead of actually using a dot, I use an image, which is a kind of crazy concept. So there's just all this flexibility here to really get creative and to really do a lot more than I think people think is even possible in here. I mentioned this on the last stream, but lately I've been feeling a little burnt out with the type of data that I've been presenting and the type of dashboards I've been building. So I've just been looking for a little bit of inspiration, and my favorite source of inspiration is going to like Behance or Dribbble or other sites where artists post their work, and trying to kind of go, hey, what is some inspiration I can find in all of this? And I've been looking at some of my favorite my favorite information designers out there. Federica Fragipani is by far my favorite information designer out there right now. And I've been looking at some of her beautiful kind of organic designs she's been using with, I mean, organic in terms of organic shapes and stuff, and thinking about how to apply that. And it's kind of helped me broaden my perspective on what you can do. Like, let me give you an example here. She did this beautiful visualization about some of the protests and the people killed in the protests in Iran. And I was thinking about, could I replicate that same effect in Excel? And you can, by using repeating images as the fill for a bar chart. That's how you would create the same texture she has created in her visualization. And then for the marker, using an image fill to kind of cap the thing off so that it doesn't just end as a rectangle. You can start to do that kind of stuff. And that is possible because of the exceptional level of customization that's available for the charts in Excel. And anyway, I've been very inspired by that kind of work and trying to apply those concepts in Excel. And I think the important part of that is if you get into a tool like Excel, it's easy to, let me show you. You know, you're trying to create a chart, and you're going to see this a lot. Let's go over here. Let's say we're trying to go in here and we want to insert a chart. By default, we get something that looks like this. Most people don't even change this. They just use this default thing that shows up, same colors, same chart type, everything. But when we have a chart like this, there's so many options. We can click into this chart, we can go to design, and we could change the chart type. We could use a different chart type altogether. We could go into each individual element of this chart and customize it and use different fill types, different styles. Turn this into something completely different, you know, with a little bit of creativity. This can be something really beautiful. We can even do things like people almost never explore. If you format your data series in Excel, you go over to this little tab here on the right, you can change your overlap. And then all of a sudden I have a completely different chart type than I did before, right? I've got a chart type here that's overlaid so I can compare two metrics more effectively. And what I really am trying to get at in all of this is if you are starting to want to do more visualizations in Excel, start building dashboards, literally just try dropping in every single chart type. Go through the list under the insert tab for each chart type, drop them in there and just try customizing every single little part in there and just see what happens. Take the time to go in, click into each part, customize it, and look at what all of the features are. And just to make this really clear into how you could do exactly what I'm talking about, we could go into any of these charts. You know, here's our donut chart. We go into our donut chart. Well, what can we customize here? We can customize angles of the slices. We can customize how exploded the donut is, meaning how kind of separated each little segment is. We can change the size of the center. So knowing that that's possible in the first place is going to be helpful. But then we also we can go in each of our data series, do things like drop shadows or glow effects in. A lot of people never even touch that kind of stuff. They don't even know it's there in the first place. And then we can do different fill colors and borders, and those borders have all sorts of different options. You could do dashed lines. You can kind of make your line look, you can do a double line or a triple line. You can add a cap type on it. You can do all these different things, right? If you go through these one by one, you'll start to discover new things. And the other part of this is not just in the styling menu, but under the design tab with your chart selected, go to add chart element and look at what all of the options are, right? Donut charts don't have as many. We've got a legend, data labels, and chart title. Okay, but let's go over to this line chart here and go to add chart element. And there's all sorts of stuff in here. We have up and down bars, trend lines, drop lines, all these things. So let me just show you an example, right? Many people never have even realized that a drop line is an option. So let's put a drop line in here. So a drop line is a line coming down from each point in our chart, top to bottom. Now, drop lines are cool, but I don't want this really dark colored line here. I want to make it look a little more subtle. So I've clicked into my drop lines. Let's see how we can customize it. Well, we can go over here. We can go to a gradient. I like that. We have to consider the angle of our gradient though. So let me get a couple of these removed. what are we at? We're at 90 degrees here. So let's say at the top we want something that matches this color, so like a dark green. And at the bottom, let's do the same dark green, but let's make it totally transparent. And then let's make the other side a little transparent. And then we've got these nice subtle drop lines in there that look pretty cool. And that's just like one of those features. If you're learning about Excel, you're learning about using these features, you wouldn't really learn about that unless you just go in through each chart and check all of the elements under the add chart element options. You just wouldn't even realize the option was there. Same thing can be said for not knowing about what the other options are when you click into a series and look at your series options. A lot of people just never explore any of this stuff. So taking the time to do that really pays dividends and can get you really, really far ahead when you're working in Excel, or really honestly working with any data visualization tool. Anything you're using, take the time to look at those options. Even if you don't master them immediately, if you're not an expert at them, that doesn't matter. Just knowing they're there gives you the toolbox you need later on when you see something to be able to leverage those skills and make something really cool with it. One of the examples I like to give is like, let's look at this line chart. We've got our markers. So, okay, a marker's a marker, cool. But what if we wanted to like make these markers a little more useful and actually show a metric there? Well, what we could do is go to the marker options. We've got it as a circle. Let's make them really big. Let's make them like 20 pixels. Okay, a little bit of overlap here. Doesn't look great. That's okay. Now let's change our fill color to match our background. Let's do like a white. And our line, we're going to make a little bigger so it matches the line behind it. There we go. And then what if we inserted the labels here? Now these labels aren't going to fit. So I'm going to preface this by saying the labels aren't going to fit properly, but I just want to show you the concept. So if we hit center, our data labels would show up inside each of these. Now we can shrink these down, we could change the formatting, but just this idea that like, hey, a boring old line chart can be changed into something a little more interesting if we learn to play around with these customization options is really, really valuable. I'm going to change this back because these numbers are too big to fit in the markers, but I think you all kind of got the point from that. All right, that is, I think, most of the topics I wanted to cover on the stream today. If you are out there looking at this going, this is crazy, I don't know where to start, I have tons of questions, drop a comment. If you're on LinkedIn or YouTube watching right now, feel free to drop comments, questions. I kind of like to say, like, this is the last call for questions or comments before I tune off here. I'm going to be streaming later today on TikTok, I think around 11 a.m. Pacific time, U.S. Pacific time. So if you want to go over to TikTok later, you're welcome to join. I'll be answering questions and kind of doing the same spiel I did today, but there's usually more of a Q&A kind of vibe on TikTok. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. DJ, I see you in the chat. Thank you for tuning in and commenting. I appreciate that. If anybody else is out there, again, if you have any questions or comments, now's the chance to ask. And look forward to streaming again here soon. I have started scheduling these streams on TikTok. I have not figured out how to schedule these streams across YouTube and LinkedIn yet. If anybody out there just happens to be an expert streamer and wants to give me the rundown on how that works, it would be very appreciated, but I'm still figuring it out. Yeah, and also I'm looking for feedback on these. Have these been helpful? What has been most helpful? What makes you tune in if you're somebody who's tuning in regularly to these? What is it you want to see more of, less of? You know, how are you using Excel, and what's the value you're getting this from this for how you're using Excel? I'm super interested in hearing more about that, because oftentimes with the videos and the TikToks and the streams, all of it, I'm kind of just winging it. I'm just kind of showing you what I'm working on that day, or an idea I had for something that seemed useful, or something that was an answer to a random question somebody asked at some point. But I am hoping to kind of give these a little more structure, dial them in a little bit more, and create something that everybody finds valuable. So if you got feedback, let me know. It's very appreciated. And thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Tina, thank you again. I appreciate the kind words. Yeah, and I think that's going to be it for now. I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I'm going to be tuning off now. Thank you again, everybody. I will be back soon with more, and have a wonderful day.